wanted to just spend a few minutes giving a little bit of story about kind of how I learnt in my career some skills around pitching. And when I talk about pitching, I don't mean standing up in front of groups of people like on The Apprentice and standing with a slide and pressing buttons and talk through bullet points. I want to get into what it actually means to get a message across to someone and be able to communicate an idea and actually influence people to take the decisions you want them to take in that kind of situation. And if I think back kind of my kind of trajectory, career stuff, I mean my first job 17 years ago was a graduate trainee at Boots in retail, and I bought toothpaste in my first job. And in that graduate scheme, you kind of go through the mill of being turned into a homogenous graduate machine of marketing, and you're taught to present in a certain way, and it's all very objective and rational. So I started my career thinking about the pitch. The pitch could be a conversation I'm having with anyone about something that I'm trying to get a message across. It could be a formal pitch, it could be a presentation. It's the same kind of things going on. You're trying to influence people to a certain point of view, a certain action. And I was taking a very rational approach to it, and that's kind of where I started from. And over the years, reflecting on the way I've been doing things, the effectiveness or lack of effectiveness of how I've been doing things, I've kind of moved on a bit. I wanted to share some of that story with you. And the first one really was thinking about what are we actually pitching when we're pitching. And we kind of always think we're pitching the thing we're pitching. We're pitching the idea, we're pitching the service, we're pitching the concept that we have. And actually a lot of the time that's not what the person who's on the other end of your pitch is thinking about, because they're thinking about the person. Because in most situations, we're subconsciously buying the person, not the idea or the product and things. And so that's something we've got to work with when we're trying to communicate some of those concepts. And we're going to think about how people make decisions. So most of us probably like to think we're quite rational. We like to think we're not influenced by things that go on in the outside world, by our peers, by marketing, by trends and things like that. But actually, most of our decision making is subconscious. Most of our decision making happens at a speed faster than we can consciously rationalise. And when you walk up to someone and you start talking to them about your idea, your proposal, your concept, they've already started to form judgments before you've even opened your mouth. And so there's all those kind of subconscious things going on that we've got to get over, as well as that how do we actually communicate a thing effectively. So yeah, I was wrong. It wasn't about the rational stuff that happens in that kind of influencing situation. It's about the emotional stuff that happens underneath as well. And being able to kind of do both of those things at once is the really powerful thing when it comes to influencing in a pitch kind of situation. So, does anyone read a book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow?
Yes.
Recommend it. It's worth. It kind of goes into this in a lot more detail, but it expands on the theory about there's two systems working in everyone's brains effectively. One of them does the things that you don't realise. It keeps you breathing. It kind of keeps things going, but it also helps you take shortcuts, because this kind of stuff, this long-term system 2 thinking that goes on, which is the rational and logical stuff that we all like to think we do, this is bloody hard work. So your brain builds shortcuts in this one that allows you to not do as much of this, basically, because we're inherently lazy. The more that happens up here, we make judgments up here based on all kinds of things, which are based on our own past, our own history. These are the things that we've got to be thinking about when we're going into that pitch situation. We're kind of thinking how we can get these sort of shortcuts to work for us. Because if we're trying to overcome the shortcuts with the rationalisation later on, it's really hard work, and we can't be as effective if we're trying to do that. So it's worth reading. So these are the kind of things that I think are worth thinking about when we're trying to think about a pitch situation, trying to get across a message to someone. And we all tend to start in the rational zone down the bottom left. We always tend to start with persuasion, so quite a logical argument, using logical facts to make a point of view, make a case. And then sometimes we might move into an assertion mode. So this is about actually a stronger form of persuasion. It's more challenging to people, but it is starting to kind of use your own emotion to try and influence people rather than just being the logical facts of something. Sometimes then we kind of use bridging in a rational way. So bridging here, bridging the technique's about a lot of active listening. It's about reflecting back to people you're trying to influence to build rapport with them. So it's kind of a rational thing if you're doing it consciously, but it appeals sometimes to the subconscious, the person who you're working with. But actually, the interesting thing, and the bit that I kind of have been working on over the past few years, is around attraction, and that's around actually making people want to like you, essentially. That sounds kind of odd and weird, but this is about being willing to disclose personal things, personal stories, personal information that makes you an emotionally engaging proposition. So what do I mean by that? This is kind of stuff that I found quite hard when I first worked with it, because it's about kind of opening up. It's not being a business person doing a presentation. It's actually being a human person, revealing yourself to create rapport. And one of the courses I went on was around storytelling, and it was about how we all as individuals, people, when we're kids, have the power to tell amazing stories. We have the imagination, we have the liberation to be able to let those things out and tell powerful stories. Yet as we get into adulthood, we kind of lose those skills, or we shut them away, or we say, we don't say those kind of things, we don't do that kind of thing. And I was forced into practicing this technique on this course I went on. And we all were told we have to tell a story that will make people cry. And I thought, I don't know how to do that. I'm a very objective, rational person. I don't do that kind of thing. And I sat down, and we had half a day to prepare this, and it was really hard work to think, how I'm going to do this. And I sat down and I thought, what made me cry? And I went and told, off the cuff, a 30-minute story about an experience I had in my life around, I'm going to do it again now, around when my first son, we got taken to hospital after about a day because he stopped breathing and stuff. It was all very difficult stuff. And I told a story, and I had a group of hard-nosed business execs who were on this course as well, in absolute tears for this. And that told me that you have the power within you, even if you think you're not, to tell stories that reach people in ways that these kind of things don't do. And so the power of kind of self-disclosure, using personal stories, they don't have to be as deeply personal as that example, but using personal stories to influence people in those kind of situations is really, really powerful. And you'll look back at what we've heard today and what some people talked about, that's been going on. You may have been consciously aware that's been happening, but there's people who've been telling those kind of stories that have been involved that kind of personal disclosure that have provided that kind of level within this model for influencing. So what I'd say is, when we're thinking about how we get ideas across, whatever situation we're in, think about these 4 boxes and think about the balances of techniques you can use to try and tell your story, to pitch your concept, your idea, get your point of view across. So those are the 4 boxes. Don't forget as well, we get very caught up in features, we get very caught up in what we're going to do. Remember, what's the point of what you're going to do? What's the benefit? So if you've got, we were talking about lean canvas and problems. So most businesses or concepts start with a problem to be solved. We've got a solution. It's dangerous. We always go into, this is the solution. It has this facet, this facet, this is what it is. That's very interesting, but actually, why does it solve the problem is the really interesting bit. So that's often the bit where we forget. So don't forget to talk about the benefits as well as the features. And just remember that the value of stories is a way of wrapping things up.
Time!
Keep going.
So stories are a wonderful way to provide a narrative through those kind of pictures. A number of people have done that today, actually. If you think about some of the things we've heard. Telling a story, a personal story, that you can hang the thing off, makes it a lot easier than just kind of giving an objective fact-based picture as well. So those are just a few of the things that I think are worth thinking about when it comes to making a pitch. There you go.
Lovely. Any questions? He's kind of wrapped it, hasn't he? Okay.
What's that? Message from me.
What's the worst pitch you've ever done? Why?
Worst pitch I've ever done?
Or one that went the worst, you know?
I wasn't there at the time, was I?
I don't know. I think so it's interesting. I've been agency side this stint for about a year now. If I look back at the last time I was agency side, it was about 10 years ago, when I hadn't done a whole of this kind of thinking. It's going in, just focusing on yourself. So thinking, kind of geeing up, saying, actually, this is what I'm going to do. The one I'm thinking about is we did a pitch. I worked for a big network agency, branding, and we were going to see Vodafone in Newbury. And we hadn't thought about the audience. We got the brief and thought, right, well, that's the brief. This is the wonderful, amazing things we're going to do. We've got some wonderful video. We've got great creative. We've got everything's lined up. Go in there, bang, bang, bang. Completely didn't take account of who we were actually talking to, what their situation was, what time of day it was, what was going on in their world. That lack of empathy and understanding with the people we were talking to, just meant it went horrendously. We didn't win it.
Why? What were the people like?
So they were Doesn't work for both of them, do they? They're big corporate. They had quite a lot of stuff going on in terms of regulatory stuff when we were there. They were quite preoccupied. They weren't really listening to us. We weren't reading the body language particularly well, so we just went on and on and on because we got a predetermined thing that went through however many slides and all the lovely things that we were very proud of. We weren't reading the body language, that they weren't interested in half the things we were talking about. We should have just skimmed straight through and got to certain bits that were more relevant. It's about understanding an audience, really, and we failed singularly to understand that audience.
And I think that's true for anything that you're trying to do. It's not about the mighty eye. It's not about, you can have the passion and all the ideas, but actually it's got to be, if it's going to be successful, it's got to have a reason, and people have got to feel that they are compelled to do it for their reasons. It's not, you are not the centre of the universe, they should be the centre of the universe.
And one of the challenges when in what we do at Decent, when we're pitching to an audience, that is we might have a marketer, we might have a finance officer, chief finance officer type person, and we might have a techie. And balancing a presentation, balancing 30 minutes that you spend with those people to give each of them enough is quite a challenge because there are stereotypes I'm making here, but typically they have very different needs, a different type of information, a different way that you engage with them, different type of things you might want to show or do with them to get a story across, and that's quite a challenge to kind of balance all those things.
Would you pitch to the three at the same time? Or
Typically that's the way it works. I mean,
yeah.
In an ideal world, if you get to have a conversation with them separately, it's easier, but often you get wheeled out in front of a group of people and you have to perform.
And within this, if you don't mind, within that, I think also you've got to also imagine that those three people don't necessarily communicate very well between themselves as well. So within organisations, there are these silos already, and you are kind of like expecting them to sort of embrace everything you're saying. Well, actually, it comes down to understanding what is the organisation like, how are they set up in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, there's tricks we do. So we look up who we're going to see. We research them, we Google them, we see if they've got particular interests. So if they've got interests and we've got something that matches that, if they're interested in open data, then we talk about open data with them. If they are on their Twitter feed, they just talk about cricket. We'll talk about cricket with them in that bit before the formal presentation because it builds rapport, which allows you to do some of the other stuff. So there's some kind of, you don't do it in a creepy way. You don't kind of say, I know we went to this last weekend, but you can. It's about emotional intelligence. Really.
Yeah, when I was a vacuum cleaner salesman,
We
we used to call it you appealing. We had to go through the front door with our vacuum cleaner and we had to look for something we could start a conversation about. So it would be a picture on the wall of someone in the sports team and you'd start, you play football? Oh yeah, I can't do it now, I've got a broken leg, but you know. And it just, you draw it out of people and that's how we used to get people to sign on the dotted line for a £900 vacuum cleaner. I was the top sales trainee in the South East.
But I just thought that would have been an excellent experience because anything where you're having to build that relationship from scratch, from nothing, is all part of what. And I've always seen as a team of people. They're all, and I know sales is a really dirty word, but actually we're always selling ourselves. That's the bottom line to this. You've got to get people to buy in. Whatever it is you're selling, you've got to get them. Every single person is a sales point within your team, and they have got to understand that and that's not a negative. That's a positive as well. But selling is something that's a really, really difficult thing.
In a socially,
selling is even if you want something from someone, if you're trying to get someone to join a partnership, or
selling is
building
kind
rapport
of,
to an outcome.
and the relationships are so important.
How do you feel about bribes?
not in the toolkit.
well, that kind of touches on something that you quite often get people pitching to the wrong people.
Yes.
So you quite often are pitching to not the managing director or not the person who holds the purse strings, but someone who's further down the organisation, or in the public sector, pitching to someone who isn't the right person, who doesn't make the funding decision. So you do need to be... Pardon?
Permafrost.
Well, yes, it can be a very frozen situation. But certainly...
To understand who calls the shots, because sometimes the person that you're talking to, even though they may give you the perception that they are, when you kind of probe a bit, you find out that they've got to check with their boss or they've got to do a presentation to the board, and suddenly your job changes because you've got to win them over, but actually you've got to equip them with the right tools, the right knowledge, the right information to then make a kind of a presentation by proxy, which can get quite tricky.
Or they're leaving next week.
Yeah.